Alright, this is my global warming speech and why it matters. My coworkers have graciously sat in for me as my audience. Can't hide, sorry, Sam. Alright. Now, I do have some visual aids I wanted to give out. This first one right here is the total climate change in Asia and the Pacific. Scott, you just want to pass that around. And then the other one is the greenhouse effect. This just explains the basic premise of what happens when CO2 emissions get released into the atmosphere. Sam. All right. On November 5th, 2017, the National Congress ordered the destruction of a vital sea ice probe and the dismantling thereof. The backup probe, which was on duty to be replaced, was denied by Congress due to lack of interest in providing funding and also repairing the broken probe. This content disinterest raises a lot of eyebrows in the scientific community and foreshadows a possible threat to future shutdown of equipment that is vital to validating the current global warming climate models. The government has a critical role in driving our country into a climate-conscious attitude, but since the new administration, this position has undoubtedly changed into a more skeptical stance. Despite the mountains of evidence of data collected by scientists over the years, the U.S. Congress has chose to ignore this data and worry about problems that are deemed more important. The current Congressional Assembly, including the President, have ignored the ongoing carbon footprint that the U.S. and its citizens put on the world on a day-to-day basis. Unheeded, the magnitude of the storms in the Gulf and the Atlantic and the withdrawal of the Paris Climate Agreement makes the U.S. the only country to ignore their carbon footprint and to withdraw from this deal. The U.S. currently does not educate their population on the current carbon footprint of its citizens, as many other countries is required to do. The United States and its government seem to be too stubborn to acknowledge the mounting evidence is genuinely an issue that must be considered of the utmost importance. The real problem lies within the overconsumption of the general population, including goods, food, and coal. The United States alone consumes 25% of the world's oil, 23% of the world's coal, and produces 50% of the world's solid waste. How could we possibly remedy this situation, you might ask? Well, the first move would be to educate the masses, including younger generations, on what must be done to avoid adding to the mounting problems. The second step would be to get local and national governments in on the action and get them to create sustainable recycling practices and creating laws around waste disposal as they do in France. Third, and what will be the most challenging part, is to change the mentality of the United States itself and its inhabitants. The inhabitants currently do not understand why the Earth has a problem and think they're not a part of it. But all these factors are contributing to a poor future for our children and a devastation of our country and the world. Not only has this unsustainable consumption polluted our cities and landed far more significant effect on the planet and the oceans themselves, the seas continue to rise as warmer oceans melt the polar ice caps, where we could be putting U.S. and world peoples at risk. On August 23, 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall in the southern state of Louisiana. This storm killed over 1,800 people and caused $108 billion in damages. It is by far the most expensive devastation of storm magnitude in the U.S. history. Although still heavily debated, scientists have concluded that due to rising seas and higher temperatures, the possibility for storms of this magnitude have increased dramatically in the Gulf, as we've seen in recent days. A few examples just a couple months ago in those hurricanes that hit Florida. They were severely larger than what a hurricane actually should be at that time of year. Okay. Global warming has not only affected one country, but it has affected all over the planet, from the US to Thailand to Japan, and also the East Coast. With the awesome power of nature at full force, the simple solution to easing the moral and financial burden is to invest in safety and education. Many large cities lay along the coast, and in these cities is where the most damage and most financial burden from damaged structures occurs. They have inadequate means of equipping their public with proper evacuation methods and safety supplies that they may need to survive in the case that they do decide to stay in the area for the hurricane. Another possible remedy for this situation is to have local cities and governments check their storm readiness and also the levees they place on their shores to ensure that they are strong enough to withstand any water that may infiltrate the cities themselves. The more education people have regarding hurricane prevention and safety will undoubtedly show in the number of lives lost and the billions of dollars lost severely drop. As an example, the water levees in Louisiana during Hurricane Katrina were not going to hold, and the local government knew about it. The problem was only corrected after the damage was done and the people had been killed. The haven for the residents at the Sports Stone also was inadequately supplied and hastily put together. It may be an investment of billions of dollars to educate and supply these cities with the necessary means, but it will be undoubtedly outweigh the costs of these natural disasters. How can the U.S. accomplish such a task of providing all these materials to their people? The answer lies in what other countries are doing and following in their footsteps to better control situations from the standpoint of politics and law. When the world leaders gathered in Paris in December 2015, they were responding to a wave of climate activism. At the conference, a group of over 100 countries that had traditionally been at odds on climate change formed the High Ambition Coalition. Propelled by grassroots activism, they successfully demanded that the agreement adopt the ambitious goal of limiting the warming of the Earth's atmosphere to 1.5 degrees Celsius. As quoted by Tony D. Brum, the Minister of the Marshall Islands, anything over 2 degrees is a death warrant for our country. The incentives for politicians to address climate change will only strengthen as more people, particularly in developing countries, leave poverty for the ranks of the middle class and gain access to the information about how climate change is directly affecting their lives and livelihoods. The shift is already well underway. In January, in a speech that stood in stark contrast to China's previously unwillingness to accept the responsibility for tackling climate change, Chinese President Xi Jinping told the World Economic Forum in Davos that all the signatories should stick to the Paris Agreement instead of walking away from it, as this is the responsibility we must assume for our future generations. And the day after, Trump signed an executive order to begin undoing the rule known as the Clean Power Plan, which Obama had implemented to reduce emissions in the United States. Miguel Arias Canante tweeted a picture of himself hugging China's current chief climate negotiator, and a caption underneath read, "A new climate era has begun and the EU and China are ready to lead the way. This undoubtedly will have lasting effects on our president, and he will have to rethink his position on the alternative energy crisis and pollution our country faces day after day. With China leading the way, it will put America in the back seat of the world, which will make Donald Trump not accept such a situation. His arrogance and selfishness could actually help the country if he decides to change his mind. The United States will need to be conscious in the next few steps in climate control in the coming century. If it wants to make sure that disasters like hurricanes can be avoided and that certain probes in the Arctic that tell climate models can be intact and the right procedures taken in the future to save people and millions of dollars. And we must ask the age-old question that our children will ask us in the future: what are the sins of our fathers and how must we clean them up? Thanks, guys.